Kick off the season in just 2 days in Salt Lake City. The second half of a home and home with the defending Pac 12 champ Utah Utes on Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Utah is ranked number 14 in the country. Florida is currently unranked. We're going to break down the matchup and hear from someone with some up close and personal knowledge of our first opponent of the year. Florida beat Utah last year in the Swamp 29-26. It took some last-second heroics from Amari Burney to seal that victory. So there are lots of questions around this year's matchup, including whether or not Utah's star quarterback Cam Rising will be cleared to play. Now remember, he is listed as quarterback 1 on the depth chart released this week, but we've also heard that it's a game-time decision. And we're also going to talk about whether or not the Gators are going to be able to handle the altitude. Now, Cam Rising gave the Gators all they could handle last season. He went 22 of 32 for 216 yards and a touchdown. And then, of course, that interception to end the game. He also ran for 91 yards on 7 attempts, and he was not sacked once. He tore his ACL in the Rose Bowl last January. And according to head coach Kyle Whittingham, he is a legitimate game time decision. If he can't go, it appears that redshirt junior Bryson Barnes will get the nod. Brant Kuithe is another veteran that hasn't gotten the go-ahead for contact just yet. Whether or not both play or don't could go a long way in determining the outcome of this game. So to get up to date on all of that and more, let's welcome in our guest, ESPN's Porter Larsen. Hey, Porter. How are you? I'm so glad you're joining us. And I'm going to start, with the question that all Gator fans want to know. What is the word on Cam Rising?
And I love that you start with that because it's where we got to go, right? But I joked with Gator Dave. I was just on with him actually. This here, if you see at the bottom, the Florida Gators depth chart, there's something called an injury report that we're not really familiar with in Kyle Whittingham country. Listen, until there's an NCAA mandate from betting agencies or whoever it may be to give a injury update, Kyle Whittingham is going to be really clandestine, especially coming into week 1, especially when there's a little bit of leeway to go one way or the other with your starting quarterback. Because why not have some ambiguity there? If you're a head coach, I would probably do the same thing. But from a coverage standpoint, it's a little tough to read between the lines. I will say we're on the about 8-month mark since the ACL surgery, so it really is a close call with Cam Rising. He feels good. He feels ready to go. But if they get to warm-ups on Thursday, which Cam will dress, he'll be there ready to go. Sure. If they get to warm-ups or shortly before and there's any sort of hiccup, any sort of setback, they're going to play it safe, right? A season opener, a kickoff against Florida, it's awesome. It's big time. But the Pac-12 title, the Pac-12 conference slate is what they are looking forward to and what they're looking at. So same thing with Kuithe. I think that both of those guys will be there and ready to go, but ultimately it's going to be up to the medical staff and the doctors, and it will be a decision that's likely made on Thursday. And it's a topic of conversation because the Utes offense changes dramatically when we look at who's going to be out there on the field.
Well, first of all, I think Gator fans feel your pain because I'm pretty sure that Kyle Whittingham actually took that page out of Urban Meyer's playbook when he moved to Florida, because that's definitely an Urban Meyer rule as well. Okay, so let's say Cam Rising doesn't go. How confident are the Utes in Bryson Barnes?
That's a good question because Bryson, he's come in and been a serviceable quarterback, right? He's had a win under his belt. He came in during Rose Bowl action and produced, but there's also been a lot of times where you see the ceiling, right? You definitely see that there is an abbreviated playbook when it is Bryson Barnes rather than Cam Rising or the quarterback before Cam with Tyler Huntley, it's noticeable, right? I think he's comfortable with the playbook. The players around him are confident in being able to run the offense, but you're not going to get the impromptu, off the cuff plays that you get from Cam Rising. And frankly, that changes Utah's offense
Sure.
in a huge way. So I don't know how confident they're confident that he can get out there and be serviceable. But when you're going against a defense coming from the SEC, you might have to do more than that. So, I think that this game really does probably hinge on who is at the quarterback position for Utah, and of course, we can discuss the quarterback position in Gainesville as well. A guy who's I think I'm higher on Graham Mertz than a lot of folks around here are, but
Mhm.
I think week one in a new system, it may take some time for him to get going. So we'll get to all that as you want to, but yeah, I think the quarterback position, as you alluded to, is going to really be the top topic of conversation, and rightfully so going into Thursday.
So you had mentioned that, Utah's real goal is the Pac-12 championship game, and this is an out-of-conference game. And but arguably, it changed the outcome of Utah's season last year because if Utah beats Florida, they go to the playoffs. So do you think that that in any way influences whether or not they put Rising out there?
You know, it's hard. We talk about the college football playoff here and there, right? Is a team that's been on the cusp a time or two. For me, I don't know, right? I think you don't really think about that until you get into midseason with an unblemished record. I think that you look at the Pac-12. There's not a team that's gone through the Pac-12 undefeated, right? They play those 9 conference games, and that's tough to get through unblemished. So I don't know that that's necessarily on their mind. I'm sure for certain players with lofty expectations, it is.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes down to game time on Thursday, it's going to be more about the long term longevity of Cam Rising, of Brant Keithy. Keep in mind, these are kids with NFL aspirations as well.
Sure.
So I don't think that they're going to go out there and if it's iffy at all,
Yeah.
they'll play it safe. That being said, yeah, if Utah gets past Florida at home and then goes to Baylor and gets a win, then maybe we can start to have that conversation. But when it comes to the college football playoff, I've only in the preseason mentioned that one time in my time covering Utah football, and it was back in 2019 where they were a half away, literally one half away from beating Oregon from getting into the college football playoff. I think we got to wait until Utah gets out of conference play unblemished before we can really have that conversation.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. What is harder to play in? Florida's heat in August or the altitude in Salt Lake City?
Oh man, we've kind of been joking about this a little bit back and forth, and the real answer is both, right? It depends on where you come from. Ultimately, for me, every time I've been in the South or anywhere that's humidity is a factor, it kicks my ass. I'm not gonna lie, like it's not easy to adjust to that. I think you saw the Utah players a little bit early on. They were trying to catch their breath. Travis Broughton was throwing up on the sideline in Gainesville. So it will affect in a similar way. But at the end of the day, these are elite athletes. And if
Mhm.
their conditioning is right, if their hydration is right, I don't expect the elevation to be a huge factor. Remember, Utah plays in Salt Lake City, which the elevation is 4,500 feet, maybe a little bit less. That's not a high enough elevation where altitude sickness really
Sure.
becomes a factor. That's when
Right.
you get into 7, 8, 10,000 feet is when legitimately you get the altitude sickness stuff to come in. So if Florida gets here is dialed in with their hydration, their nutrition, I don't think it'll be a huge factor until maybe we get into the fourth quarter, and even then, it's going to maybe affect a Desmond Watson and your defensive tackles more than it will the guys who are conditioned. And that's not an indictment or talking down on Desmond. It's a physiological fact, right? It's harder when your lungs are not used to that, especially when you're trying to carry 300, 400 pounds. Maybe will affect those guys as we see the the game carry on, especially if Utah's able to establish the run. But ultimately, I think it's less of a factor than it's made out to be up until kickoff. Ultimately, I think a lot of us are really bored over the course of the off season. We have to find stuff to discuss.
Looking for things to talk about. Quickly, big thanks to Daryl and Chris for your super chats. I appreciate you guys. Porter, you alluded a little bit to Florida's big men and in relation, obviously, to the altitude, but how does Utah prepare for the size that they're going to see on Florida's lines?
I mean, how do you prepare? If you look at Florida's roster, there are some of legitimately the biggest humans I've ever seen. Like at the defensive line, you've got a couple of guys near that 400-pound mark. I think Desmond's listed at like 430. You prepare for that in the same way you do against really any other team, but you have to be ready for different looks, right? You're going to see Desmond Watson one snap and a different defensive front the next snap. And I think for Utah, it's more about dialing into in the film room what those guys do differently and realizing that you're going to see a different guy in front of you for your blocking assignment every other snap or so, right? And it's the same story on Utah's side. They've got 6-7 guys on the defensive front that they're going to rotate through, and Florida's going to kind of be looking at that same adjustment where you've got different bodies, different skill sets that are rotating through there each and every snap. But something that actually surprised me and may surprise a lot of Gators fans is when I went through the starting depth chart. At least a lot of the guys on the roster that really stand out are actually backups or second string, third string. Utah's starting offensive line is actually bigger than Florida's starting offensive line, which is not something you maybe expect going into an SEC versus a Utah team. But I think that picture that I just painted is what's going to decide this football game. How does Utah's offensive line, which is a really good unit, handle that defensive front of Florida? And I really zero in on the matchup with true freshman Spencer Fano and of course your guys' defensive ends. You got Princely. I know Chris McClellan's probably out in this game. I'm not sure if that's come down the line officially yet, but we'll see there. I think that's the real X factor, not necessarily Florida's size, because Utah has some personnel to at least handle that marginally. I think it's more about the edge position and the young tackles for Utah.
Okay, so if this is a close game in the fourth quarter, what strengths do you think Utah has over Florida that will help them win?
Well, I guess it depends on who's at quarterback, because I think that if Utah is without Cam Rising, they're going to start the game and really go throughout the game trying to establish the run more so than you would have seen. I think that goes without saying. It's kind of self-explanatory there. But Kyle Whittingham's MO, once you get a lead, or if you are, like you mentioned, in the fourth quarter, is to chew the clock. It's to try to run the ball down the opponent's throat, similarly to what Florida did a lot of last year, right? I mean, you guys had 2 ball carriers who averaged 5 yards per carry or more. You add that to Anthony Richardson, and that's what Kyle Whittingham wants to do, right? If it's a 17-14 game in the fourth quarter, Kyle's going to be plenty happy with that. And he's going to try to chew the clock. He's going to try to run that down and keep possession. And I wonder what Utah's strategy is if Cam is in the game, right? Because I think that which Cam Rising you get is the question there. He provides a 2-dimension offense that it completely changes the playbook, right? And if you don't have Cam, then you're going to really be keying in on the run game. And for Florida, I think that's what you want, right? You want Utah to try to run the ball a lot, because then you can use, as you mentioned, that defensive front to kind of wear down on the offensive line and use that size and hopefully the altitude doesn't get to you too much, and you're still fresh in the fourth quarter. And I think that would play into Florida's hands. But if Utah does have Cam Rising, I think it points to them having a little bit more of a two-dimensional offense and not having to play to their strengths too much, right? Andy Ludwig's MO is to always be balanced, right? 50-50 run pass, and that's what they're going to try to do if Cam is there and healthy. But again, that changes dramatically if that's not the case.
Okay, so two-parter. What is the overall mood among Utah fans? And then what's the mood like among the football team? And is it different?
Yeah, I mean, Utah fans always come in super confident. I think that's you're ranked for another year in the preseason. You're coming off of a season opener last year where Florida got you in the last minutes of that game in the swamp. So I think Utah fans are really confident. Now, the team, number one, we go back to our conversation earlier. It's super clandestine up there. They're not telling us about injuries. They don't let us watch much of practice. We get a few minutes with the players after the game or after practices to do some media availability, but it's pretty limited. That being said, I think that this team is really, really confident going into 2023. They're coming off of 2 Pac-12 championships, and I think that getting over that hump, getting those Pac-12 titles, takes a little bit of pressure off of a roster, right? And now you can look at those bigger, loftier goals with a little bit different perspective. And for Utah, I think that's where they sit. Now, that being said, I think there's probably some uncertainty with the status of Cam Rising. This is a team who really looks to him, not only as their quarterback, but is their vocal leader, kind of their motivator. Kyle does it, of course, but Cam is that very talkative, very outspoken quarterback that you're used to seeing at the forefront. If he trots out there and is ready to go snap one, I think there's a different energy for this football team. If he doesn't, I'm pretty interested to see how they react, because that could be a little deflating to start the year.
Is this a revenge game?
I guess that a lot of the players think so. There's not that much history between these two schools. They've only played a couple of times, so it's not like a rivalry, or it's not like there's a whole lot there. I think, frankly, most of the history between these two schools is off the field. It's Urban Meyer, it's Dan Mullen, it's Brian Johnson, right? So there's a lot of respect between these two programs. I think less of a revenge game and more of a respect that Florida is maybe not what they are used to being. Maybe they're not the national contender year in and year out that we saw back in the day, but there's still a lot of respect for this program. And for Utah, revenge is on the mind, but it's more about, I think, handling business in this year specifically in your home stadium, the biggest kickoff, I think, in a season opener since they welcomed Harbaugh in Michigan. And for that reason, I think there's a lot of excitement without even mentioning the fact that it is a revenge game. That being said, there are a few certain players like Cam Rising who threw the late pick, like Cole Bishop, who missed like 15 tackles in his debut against Florida last time. Certain guys, I think, definitely have a little bit more of a sour taste in their mouth and may look at it as more of a revenge game. But I really do think it's two decent programs in two very different places as far as the college football landscape goes that probably have a lot of respect for each other going both ways.
All right, before we keep going, if you're watching at home, if you have any questions for Porter, shoot them over. We love the super chats and the support. Okay, Porter, what worries you the most about UF? And then second part, what gives you the most confidence in Utah?
Yeah, I think what worries me from a Gators perspective is, of course, Utah's uncertainty at the quarterback position. If it's Bryson Barnes or even Nate Johnson, I think Florida and their size, their physicality up front you're going to look to make Utah one dimensional, right? And with the assets you have on the edge, with the size you have in the middle, I think that can become a real issue if Utah's not able to pass the ball, if they're not able to get the ball downfield, and you do see Florida start to stack the box, right? Whether it's on a Bryson Barnes or a Nate Johnson, if you see them start to put 7, 8 guys in the box, that can get really dicey for Utah. Not because they can't run the ball, but because, as I mentioned, Andy Ludwig is so set on a balanced attack, right? So much of Utah's offense is predicated on setting up the play action, getting the tight ends involved, getting a few wide receivers involved here and there. There's never that wide receiver one who's got 1,000 yards. It's always 7, 8 guys who have 300-400 yards, right? So it's that balanced attack of Utah that allows them to be so productive. If you're able to key in on that, because there is a question about quarterback. And that being said, even if Cam does go, how mobile is he, right? Is he a statue in the pocket? Because if he can't be mobile, if he can't keep Florida's linebackers and DBs kind of on their heels, I think things can get really, really dicey for Utah. And on the other side, the thing I'm most confident in for Utah is their defense. I think that, I mentioned earlier, I'm higher on Graham Mertz than I think some are. But in his first game at Florida, in a new system with a new play caller, coming into Rice Eccles against a defense that I'm projecting to be another top 20 unit in college football, that's a tough ask. And there's a wealth of depth on the defensive side for Utah. There's really no question marks on that side of the ball for them. So for me, it comes down to that's Utah's strength, right? Especially when all the uncertainty on the offensive side, all the new faces on the offensive side come into account. Utah's gonna look to their defense to make some plays. They're gonna look to their defense to hold Florida in check. And the real X factor there is how much Graham Mertz in his first game as a Florida Gator can get the ball downfield and avoid that one-dimensional offense, right? Florida's going to look to run the football. They're going to try to get it to Montrell Johnson and Etienne a lot. But there's going to be 5-6 times during the course of the game where Graham Mertz is asked to get the ball downfield and make a true quarterback play, right, in a close contest. I think there's going to be a few moments there. And if he's able to do it against this stout Utah defense, I think it ups Florida's chances by a lot, and inversely hurts Utah a lot if they're not able to keep Florida in front of them.
Okay, so what is a name that UF fans may not know right now, but they will know after Thursday night?
You probably heard about Jaquindon Jackson last year. He was the backup quarterback as the year started. But he, as the injuries started to stack up for Utah last year, he made the switch to running back. And over the last month or 2 months of the season, he really, really started to find his comfortability in that role as a running back. As you guys know, that's an entirely different position. When you're used to sitting in the shotgun, getting your drop back and assessing the defense, and now you're asked to sit in the shotgun behind the quarterback and step up at the snap. You're expected to pick up blitzes and read the running lanes in front of you. That's an adjustment. And it did take Jaquindon Jackson a few games to really get used to that. A lot of folks are projecting him to be an all-conference type running back now that he's had a year of experience there. And he usurped Mekhi Bernard, Chris Curry, Jalen Glover, guys that you may have actually heard their names, and he's usurped all of them as the starter for Utah. He's the featured back coming into the season, and I think that's a guy you really want to look out for, especially if snap one on Thursday, Cam Rising's not out there, because they're going to really, really rely on their run game if they aren't at full strength at quarterback.
Okay, so before I ask you this next question, were you in the Swamp last year?
I wasn't. I didn't make the trip to the Swamp, but of course, I actually have been in the South for some SEC contests. Not at the Swamp, but I was at an LSU Florida game in Louisiana. So I've experienced the SEC atmosphere, but we were actually doing a watch party, a big season kickoff here in Salt Lake that I had to do my pregame show at on
Sure.
site. So I didn't make the trip to Gainesville, but that's one I want to do sometime.
Okay, so the question basically is, we've heard a lot about the atmosphere at Utah and that it's going to be tough and it's going to be intense. Now, Utah has a smaller stadium than anybody but Vanderbilt in the Southeastern Conference.
Right.
I don't know anything about the loudness or the intensity of the stadium, though. So, what can Gator fans expect on Thursday night if they are going to the game? And do you think that's something that could affect this Florida team at all?
Yeah, and I talked about this with Dave a little bit ago, right? I mentioned I've been in SEC country. I've been to a Florida LSU game. So a lot of folks on the West Coast, they kind of ho-hum when they hear the SEC aura of it being different, right? It just means more. I agree. It does. I've been at an SEC football game, and it's different. It really is different from a lot of the environments that I see out here on the West Coast. But what I will say is, at least in comparison to the other environments on the West Coast, Rice Eccles is also a little bit different, right? It does mean a little bit more in Salt Lake than it does maybe in Palo Alto or in Los Angeles. So I think that Gator fans are going to be – they're going to be impressed. They'll be pleasantly surprised with the atmosphere, right? This is a stadium who sold out every game since 2010. It's a stadium who it does get loud. It does get pretty raucous. A really, really good home field advantage. I've covered this team for 6 years now, and I've only seen them lose at home twice. And one of those times was in the COVID era when there was no one in the stands, right? So the home field advantage is real. The atmosphere is real. It's not going to necessarily relate to the Swamp when you talk about the sound, because you can't replicate 90,000 people. You just can't do it. That's a scientific thing. But it'll be loud, and I think that they'll be pleasantly surprised with the tailgate atmosphere, with the game day atmosphere, and when kickoff comes, they'll get a little bit of a dose of respect for the Utah and Rice Eccles Stadium. But that being said, SEC country, they won't be surprised, or they won't be out of their element by any means. They're used to environments like this.
All right, Porter, before we get you out of here, we're going to play a little rapid fire over-unders, okay?
All right.
UF runs for over or under 200 yards.
Oh, man. They were, I think, over 200 yards average last season. And they were, of course, not many teams actually end up doing that over the course of an entire season. They bring back both of those starters, but without Anthony Richardson, I think that makes it a very different element to the run game. I'm going to go under, but just barely. I think Florida gets close to that number, and I think if they get over that number, Allie, you may be getting out of Rice Eccles with a win, because I think with Utah, they're really going to be keying in on stopping the run and trying to make Graham Mertz beat you in his first game as a Florida Gator in hostile environment. I think they're going to really key in on Montrell Johnson and ETN, and there'll be a focus on stopping the run. Utah's going to be physical up front, as you guys know, and experienced a little bit last year, right? That was a game that was really, really decided in the trenches. It was physical. We're going to get that again. And in addition to that, I know it hasn't been talked about a whole bunch, but the clock's going to run a little bit more. We've seen in week zero, week zero, there were maybe a possession less per game for teams. So I think we're going to adjust to that a little bit as well. But again, I think Utah's going to really, really key in on the run game and try to make Florida one-dimensional. And they'll have some success there. But of course, with the size up front for Florida, with the running backs you do have, they're going to have their success here and there. I think they get above 150, but I'm going to go under on the 200.
All right. Well, I'm going to play along too. I'm going to go over.
Okay.
I
like it.
Mertz touchdown passes over or under 1.5.
Oh man, another one that I think if he goes over that, I think that kind of points to my last point, right? Where that means that Utah's not able to keep Florida one dimensional. And I think if Graham Mertz has 2 or more touchdown passes, I think Florida gets out of there with a win. But I'm going to go under again, and that may lead you to my prediction for the game. But yeah, I think that in his first game with Florida, his first game with a new play caller and against Utah in a hostile environment, I'm going to go with Florida, kind of trying to establish the run game. If they do get into the end zone 3, 4, 5 times, I think the majority of those will be on the ground, and a lot of that has to do with how stout Utah's defense is, right? I think it's going to be a lot of hard fought red zone battles, and that points to Montrell Johnson specifically being the guy that I point to with, if you give me an over under on his touchdowns, or you combine him and ETN, I'll probably go the over there. But I think Mertz may be more inclined to, and the offensive play calling maybe more inclined to allow Mertz to kind of settle in and take a little bit of time to get comfortable in this offense.
I agree with you. I'm going with the under as well. I think that they are going to try and ease him into this and try not to ask him to do a whole lot if they don't have to. So I'm going to go with the under as well. Okay, total score, over or under 45 points?
I'm going to go over. I think it'll be a similar score to last year. I think the winner of this football game is going to be right around that 30 mark, and the loser 24-27, right? I think it's going to be one of those football games, back and forth battle, really a battle of possessions. Billy Napier, Kyle Whittingham, both guys that are going to try to establish the run. But I think that the offenses are good enough that you get the over, even with this being kind of a hard-fought physical football game, but not by much. This is not going to be a game where you see 40s and 50s. No. It's going to be maybe high 20s, and I think just irking over that 45-point mark.
Okay, so I don't want to give away my score prediction just yet, but I'm going to go with the under, but just barely. Okay. UF gets over or under 2.5 sacks in this game.
I'm going to go over on that one, and the reason I say that is because Utah is starting a true freshman at left tackle. They also, as I mentioned, it's either Cam Rising on a fresh ACL recovery, or it's Bryson Barnes or Nate Johnson, who they may be a little less comfortable in the pocket. And then we've talked about the physicality up front for Florida. Princely, I don't know if McClellan's going to play. You may have to fill me in there. But I do think that Florida is going to I think they're going to send a lot of blitzes. And whether they can get pressure with 4 is a question. But if they aren't able to, I think you're going to see a lot of different packages where they're sending pressure because they want to put it on Cam Rising. They want to test that ACL. And if it's not Cam, they're going to want to test Bryson Barnes and Nate Johnson's ability to pick up those blitzes. So I think Florida's going to send a lot of pressure, and I think they'll get over that mark on the sack list, and we'll see Utah's ability to kind of slow that down. I think they'll settle in later on in the game. I am pretty comfortable with the Utah offensive line, but that doesn't mean that they're going to stop Florida's front entirely. So I'll go the over there. I'll go the over there.
All right, I'm going the over there as well. I think that Florida is pretty confident in this new defensive line that they have built. All right, over under 0.5 snaps taken by Cam Rising.
Man, I'm going to go over. I think Cam plays. I really do. And I go back to the Florida game last year. His motivation to play is a little bit deeper than maybe another player would be. I know that last play of the game in the swamp really, really sticks in his craw. He's going to want to avenge that, but ultimately it's going to come down to the medical staff, right? I think Cam will dress. I think he'll go out there and you'll see him take snaps before the football game, and then it's going to be up to the medical staff. If there's any sort of hiccup, if there's any sort of question mark, you're going to see Bryson Barnes come out there for snap number 1. But we asked Cam yesterday how he was feeling. He said pretty damn good. That was his
Yeah.
quote. And then
Yeah.
after that, we asked when the decision might be made. And I think someone mentioned 10 minutes before kickoff,
Yeah.
and Cam mentioned maybe like 7 minutes before kickoff, and he wears number 7. I don't know if you want to read too much into that,
Lines there.
um, but he did it, and he said that with a little bit of a smirk. I think Cam has made the decision that he wants to play, but ultimately, as I mentioned, it's going to come down to probably tomorrow and Thursday, the medical staff making that decision. But ultimately, if you ask me today, I think it's a 75% chance that Cam trots out there for the first snap.
I'm going with the over on this as well. I just think he's too big of a competitor. If he has any say in it at all, I think he's going. All right. What is your final score prediction?
I've been going back and forth on this a lot, and week one, it's really hard to prognosticate any sort of scores because you look at college football, you watch week 0, it was just all over the map, right? There's sloppy football. There's going to be a play or two where maybe a drop snap and a score. We saw last year there was a few kind of funky chaos plays that happened as well. I expect that to happen in week 1, but I'm gonna go similarly to last year, Allie. But I'm gonna take Utah in a I guess a revenge game, but with a similar score. I'm gonna go 30-27 Utah with the win. I think it was 29-26 in the Swamp last year. I think we're gonna see a similar football game. I really do. But I think that if Cam Rising plays, which I do think he does as of today, I'm gonna go Utah 30-27. If he doesn't play, I reserve my right to switch that around, and I'm going to go probably 24-27 for Florida on the other side. I still think Utah will score some points and be able to run their offense, but I do think they need Cam Rising out there in order to beat Florida.
All right, Porter, thank you so much for joining me. Tell everybody where they can find your work and follow you and get Utah insight all year long. I know Gator fans truly kind of became Utah fans last year after week 1, so I know they want to know the details.
Yeah, I am at Larsen_ESPN. We're on live ESPN 700 and 92.1 FM. Probably the website or tune in or however you stream or podcast is the best way to find our stuff there. I host all the pregame stuff. So if you're in Salt Lake on game day, 4 hours before kickoff, we'll have our coverage of game day stuff getting going. I'll be live on the air then. And then, of course, all the social stuff online, on Twitter, on Instagram, whatever it may be. We'll be bringing you game day coverage. But yeah, looking forward to following you guys all season long as well. I mentioned it earlier, but there's a lot of kind of off the field connections with Utah and Florida, with Urban and Dan Mullen and our guy Brian Johnson, who was there for a long time. There's a lot of those connections, and I'm excited to kind of follow you guys. I'm a big Cowboys fan and a Emmitt Smith fan. So there's always been a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for the Gators and Gainesville. So I'll follow along as well, and looking forward to finding your coverage. And Allie, before we go, I did want to send my thoughts to everyone out in Florida. I know there's the big storm. There's the awful shooting situation that happened over the course of the weekend. So everyone in Salt Lake and especially here at the station, we're sending our thoughts and well wishes to folks out in Florida and the folks trying to make the trip out here as well.
I appreciate it, Porter. Thank you very much. And thanks for your time. And we will be watching with bated breath on Thursday night.
Likewise. Thank you guys for having me.
Have a great night. All right, guys. I've got some super chats that have come through. I super appreciate them. I saw that Daryl asked, when Florida is leaving for Salt Lake. And according to Jacob Rudner, they already left. They began their travel to Salt Lake City today, and they're staying the night in Dallas. And then tomorrow they will go ahead and fly on to Salt Lake City. So, this is an opportunity for them to just kind of avoid the storm, basically. They won't get to adjust to the altitude any earlier, but supposedly they did some intense studies at UF to kind of figure out when the best travel time was, and they determined that they really think you needed a long period of time to adjust, or you needed to just go ahead and get in and get out. So that's what UF is choosing to do, but they will spend the night in Dallas and then finish the trip tomorrow. And Daryl, I really appreciate the super chat. You guys have been awesome tonight. We're going to talk a little bit more before we wrap this up. I want to talk about some areas that Florida could exploit. Porter talked about this kind of a lot, honestly. He talked about Spencer Fano. He is a freshman, true freshman, going to start at left tackle for them. Florida obviously has an incredibly large and deep defensive line. I think that this is a major mismatch, and the Gators should attack it all night long. The rest of Utah's line is relatively experienced. They returned 3 of 5 starters. So if you're going to look for the weakest link, you're going to look for Spencer Fano just because he's new, right? He's young. He's a true freshman. He has absolutely not experienced anything like a defensive line from the SEC. So if I'm Florida, I'm going after him all night long. Florida's strength should be in its defensive front 7. If UF can stop Utah from moving the chains early and apply pressure to their quarterback, whether that's Cam Rising or someone else, I think that means it could be a really long night for the Utes. Florida has the athletes to get into the backfield, but also most of them are untested. And Utah historically has a very strong running game. If they are able to be multidimensional, it could be a problem for Florida. So I think that Florida's defensive line is a huge piece to this puzzle. And on paper, Florida is the more talented team. Athlete for athlete, there is no real comparison. So what areas do I think Florida needs to maybe overperform? Okay. Kyle Whittingham has said that this is his most physical and his most talented defense that he has ever had at Utah. And honestly, that's saying something because Utah has been great for a long time. They've been incredibly consistent. They get consistent coaching. They are relentless. They are tough. They are disciplined. So for him to make those comments about this defense does make me think that we are going to see some great football from them on that side of the ball. If Florida can generate any type of movement on offense, they're going to need to do it early, right? If Kyle Whittingham's defense can apply pressure to the Gators from the very beginning, it could be a long night for us. Florida needs this offensive line to perform. They need to allow those running lanes to open up for the running game early. You want this running game to be established because that's the only way that any of these passing options are going to open up for the Gators. So I really do think Florida needs this defense that we've heard all about this offseason, how it's much improved. They're tough, they're gritty, they're focused. We need to see it. We need to see it early in this game if the Gators are going to win. And another area that I have been screaming about that I need to be better is special teams. They were not good under Napier last year. In a ballgame that's probably going to be very close, special teams performances make or break these teams. So I'm going to need to see the Gators step up on special teams. You've got to hit every extra point. You've got to hit your field goals. I need to see good punts. I need to see some returns. Florida has got to play better than they did last season. So who's going to win? Well, I'm going to give you my score prediction at the end, but I will tell you this. Whoever dominates the line of scrimmage is going to win. Cam Rising might not be 100%, and obviously we all have questions about Graham Mertz, but the team who wins is the team that takes care of business in the trenches. And listen, I know you would think that automatically, okay, so that means the SEC team wins, right? Because they are bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. Well, as Porter pointed out, first of all, our starting offensive line is actually smaller than Utah's, which I think is an interesting fact. But also, Utah ran the ball really well last year against our defense. That offensive line, who's returning 3 of 5 starters, did well. So that is going to have to improve for the Gators. And by the way, I think it does. Okay, I'm going to take you back to last season. I was sitting in the swamp, and Utah was staring the go-ahead touchdown in the face. I honestly thought for sure we were going to go sit in traffic with a loss to open the Napier era. And I don't know about you, but I didn't have a lot of hope in that moment. Rising and Utah had knifed down the field, and I didn't think we had a chance to get the stop. But then Amari Burney stepped in front of Rising's final pass of the night and made what was probably the biggest play in UF's entire season by intercepting his pass on the goal line. Florida basically walked it off with a massive play when it looked like they were left for dead. And what I want to see this year is who's going to be this year's Burney. Who is going to step up and be the hero when UF needs it most? Who's going to make the biggest play of the game? That's what I need to see. That's what I'm excited for. The entire nation is going to be watching this game on Thursday night. It is the start of college football. Who is going to win that game for Florida? Whose name do we remember after Thursday night? So I guess if you've come this far, you're wanting to know what my score prediction is. But just before we do that, I want to show some love to Meldon Law. Listen, guys, there are a bunch of injury firms out there, but there is only one that is an official partner of the Florida Gators. The official injury firm of the team that plays in the swamp should be your official injury firm as well. They do so much to give back to our program, and we appreciate the partnership with them. And listen, you may not need them today, but if you're hurt or you know someone that is in an accident, give them a call or shoot them a message. It's Meldon Law. And if you don't need them today, do me a favor, go to their Facebook and enter to win tickets to the Florida-Georgia game in their ticket giveaway. We're not asking you to buy anything or spend any of your money. Let Meldon Law treat you to the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. There will be a link to register in the description of this video. All right, it is time. What is my final score prediction? All right, the game is in Salt Lake, Thursday night, 8 o'clock. We are less than 48 hours away if you're listening to this live. If you're watching it tomorrow morning, then obviously we're even closer. I think Florida wins 24-17. I think that Florida's offense is conservative, but does enough to get it done. I think we see this running game get established. And most importantly, I think we see some major improvement from Florida's defense. So there you have it. The Gators are going to win. Thoughts and prayers to everyone that is affected by this hurricane. We're writing it out here in Tampa, but I know that there are lots of people that are getting it worse than us. We are definitely thinking about you. Listen, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We've only done a live a couple of times on here, and these are so much fun. We're typically going to do them Thursday nights at 8 p.m. So we'll be back live next Thursday to preview UF's home opener. I appreciate you all a ton for the love and support. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button on the way out of here, and we'll see you all soon, hopefully to break down the Gators' first win in week 1.